Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to the Jason Wright Show. Today is a great conversation that I had with former NFL great Randy Grimes, also a fellow East Texan and also a fellow Tylerite. I am very happy to say. Here's a little bit about Randy's story. He is a former professional football player whose career spanned 10 years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Randy Grimes had spent 20-plus years battling an addiction to painkillers that he had developed while trying to treat career-related injuries. He now uses his inspiring story of recovery to help victims of drug and alcohol abuse through his work as an interventionalist, recovery advocate, and founder of Athletes in Recovery. In 2012, out of a desire to help other struggling athletes that he played with and against, Randy launched Athletes in Recovery, a program which is designed to help athletes of all levels find treatment for addiction, while offering continued support for those already in recovery. Due to the success of Athletes in Recovery, Randy has partnered with the NFL, MLB, Gridiron Greats, After the Impact Fund, the Jockeys Guild, Tulane Sports Program, NFLPA, NFL Alumni, Motorsports Safety Group, NHL, etc., to bring further awareness and treatment services to professional athletes and their families. As a result of these partnerships, hundreds of former professional athletes and their families have since been treated. Randy's passion for helping others does not end with athletes, and he is committed to helping numerous families find balance and peace of mind by getting their addicted loved ones to the help they need for their drug and alcohol addiction. Randy has performed countless interventions all over the country and has brought hope and healing back to families when it seemed all hope was lost. His never-give-up attitude translates from the gridiron to his recovery. Married for 40 years to his college sweetheart, Lydia, who is also a certified family addiction coach, they have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Randy can regularly be seen as a commentator on numerous national TV networks, including NFL Network, Anderson Cooper, Father Albert, CNN, Fox News Sports, MSNBC, Fox News, New York Daily News, New York Times, SiriusXM Sports, and he is often called on to provide professional insight and opinion for countless radio interviews and print media pieces. Randy is just a badass. That's all there is to it. He's a great dude. I had so much fun getting to talk to him. We broke this up into 2 parts because I had some technical difficulties at the end of our first recording. And so you'll hear that. I mean, it doesn't mess up the quality of the audio or anything like that. And it certainly doesn't mess up the quality of Randy's story. But if it stops and you hear a little break in there, that's all that is. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Also, I want to recommend his new book, Off Center. I'm going to include a link to it in the show notes. This is a book where not only is it a more in-depth tale of Randy's story, but he allows his family to discuss their side of the story. I think so often when we hear these stories of people that have overcome addiction, they become the main character of the story, but there's also all of the kind of the collateral damage around them. Randy describes it in this interview as like a jellyfish that has these tentacles that touch and sting everything around it. And he said that's exactly what it's like for the life of an addict. It's not just them going through the highs and the lows and overcoming the odds or falling under the weight of it, but it's also the family that's having to deal with this. And I can tell you right now, Lydia, and you listen to his story, and I say it several times, Lydia, his wife, is an absolute hero. She may not be quite as big as Randy, but I guarantee you she's every bit as strong mentally and emotionally. She is awesome. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you need help, reach out. Again, in the show notes, you will have access to Randy's programs and how to get in touch with him. If you or a loved one are facing these addictions, just do what Randy says at the end of this conversation. I gave him one chance to say, what do you tell these people? He said, raise your hand and say, I need help. That's where it all starts. It's admitting that you need the help. So if you need it, then go get it. And now with that, here is my friend and former NFL great and just present awesome guy, Randy Grimes. Thank you so much for listening. Grimes, welcome to the Jason Wright Show, brother. How are you, my man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be back in Tyler.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're a local hero, and it's good to be visiting with a fellow East Texas boy.
Well, I'm glad to be back, and I look forward to getting up there this weekend and seeing some old friends and making some new ones.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's just jump right into this thing, man, because I mean, you've done something that less than the top 1% of all athletes have ever done. You've been of course, man, here's the thing. This shows both of our age, Randy. So you played in the Southwest Conference. Now, the Southwest Conference was still around back when I was playing ball. So for those diehards out there who missed the glory days, they know exactly what the Southwest Conference was. Uh, so you're a Baylor Bear, and then you have a great NFL career, and then we're also going to talk about some of your personal. Both I want to talk about the highs and as well as the lows because I think that people can learn from both, and it's kind of funny how those valley moments that everybody goes through at some point in life. I once had somebody tell me, the valleys suck, but that's where the good stuff grows. There's nothing growing up on the mountaintops. It's all growing in the valleys.
Right, right.
And so with that, let's just get started, man. Tell me about from Robert E. Lee to Waco, Texas as a Baylor Bear, then off to the NFL. Where does this story begin?
Well, yes, it begins at Robert E. Lee. I was, I had the opportunity. Well, let me start by saying football came easy for me. Football wasn't religion in my house, but it was a close second. I had a brother that went off to Southern Arkansas. I had a sister that went off to Baylor. I had the opportunity to go pretty much anywhere in the Southwest Conference I wanted back then. And I chose Baylor. I had a sister that was there, and being the good Baptist that I was, I wanted to make Mama proud. So going to Baylor was, and I wanted to play for Grant Taft. Once I met that guy, I knew that, he was the guy that I wanted to play for. So, yeah, I went off to Baylor, had a great 4 years. I met my wife the very first day, my freshman year of school. Went out with her that night, and we got married after our junior year. And again, football came easy for me. I had a great college career, and the Bucks drafted me in the second round. I was the 45th player selected that year, and the second center to be selected that year. And we were just so excited. At that time, I'd never even seen the ocean, and here I was going to, and the Buccaneers had just had a playoff year the year before, in '82. So I was excited to be going to a playoff contender, and the seaside community of Tampa, Florida. We were so excited.
I'm a little bit jealous of you, So I grew up in Sulphur Springs,
Hmm.
and Grant Taft was the assistant coach to my head football coach in high school, James Cameron, at Howard Payne.
Oh wow!
And of course, probably not much different than here in Tyler. Growing up in Sulphur Springs, as we share that in common as a good Southern Baptist boy, all the mothers wanted their kids to go to Baylor, and I wanted to go to Baylor so bad. And they invited me up there for a spring game and a spring visit, and I got to meet Coach Taft. He was still there when I was going through my recruiting season, and I'd always thought I'm going to Baylor. I mean, that's just I grew up
Right.
thinking there was no other school, and but they did not recruit me. I ended up at Stephen F. Austin State University now. And here's the thing that was different between me and you, probably. I was the same way. Football came real easy to me, but I was burnt out. I didn't like football, but it was also the only way I was going to get to go to college. And so I went to SFA. I wanted to go to of all the schools I visited. God, it's so fun having this conversation because there's some names from the past.
Right.
I went up to Arkansas, and they had recruited me, and they wanted to give me a scholarship, but that's when Danny Ford had come out of retirement, and took over to try to bring some fire back to, the Arkansas program,
So Lou
and
Holtz anymore.
he wanted to give me a spring scholarship instead of a fall scholarship, and I was like, "So you're telling me I have to come pay out of pocket for that first semester, and there's no guarantee that I get a scholarship in the spring? I don't think so." And so I ended up going to SFA.
Which is a great school. You know.
Yeah, well, I had a very good time there. It was a great experience, and so now tell me what it's like from the moment you're and of course now Tyler, people that are from Dallas and Houston still consider us a small town, but the fact is Tyler is more of a mid city now. But back in the day, back when you were playing, it was kind of a small town. Now you end up in Tampa Bay in the NFL. Just kind of take me through what that life-changing experience was like at the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, Tyler was a small town by comparison. It was just us and John Tyler back then, and T.K. Gorman. You can't leave those
Yep.
guys out, and they actually had some pretty good football teams. But yeah, I mean, football was, Friday Night Lights and all the hurrah stuff that goes along with high school football. That was going on in Tyler. I had a great coach, Bill Farrington. Uh, I had some great assistant coaches, but best of all, I had some great teammates, and that's what made it so special. And the ability in high school, you can still play other sports. You can play baseball, you can run track, and
Right.
be a great football player. You didn't have to just pick one thing like they do now. But you know, going to Tampa, the game got so much faster, stronger, and quicker at each level that I went to. From high school to college, from college to pros. And I had a locker right next to Leroy Selman. Um, and this was right after I'd gotten drafted and was going out there for mini camps. And the Leroy taught me a lot. We had a lot of deep conversations, and he taught me a lot about being a man, not only on the field but off the field too. And the second thing that Leroy taught me was that football was no longer a game. Now it was a full time job. And I still looked at it like a game when I first got there. Hey, the Bucks drafted me. I'm gonna get to continue playing center. I get to play against all this great talent and all over the country. But it really was. It turned into a job really quick.
Who was your first quarterback that you were snapping for?
I had two quarterbacks that first year: Jack Thompson, the throwing Samoan, and Jerry Goldstein,
Mhm.
because we had just lost Doug Williams. Him and the owner had a falling out, so he was around for my rookie mini camp, but he wasn't for my first training camp. So I didn't get to play with Doug Williams. He was a great player, as we all know, and went on to do some great things in Washington and even in the USFL. But yeah, Jerry Goldstein and Jack Thompson were my first quarterbacks, and then DeBerg came in, and then Steve Young came in, and then Testaverde came in for the last 4 years of my career. So
Of the
I had a lot of quarterbacks.
You had some good ones too, like Vinny Testaverde. I mean, that's the one that kinda sticks out in my mind, and I forget that Young was even there. So, did you have one that, you liked best?
Yeah, well, Vinny is the one that had the most talent, but Steve DeBerg, he was the guy that you love to come back to the huddle and see, because he was always in control. He was always joking around. It was never serious with Steve, but he played like it was serious. And that's the kind of guy you want to come back to and see in the huddle when things are getting out of hand, and see somebody that's in control, in charge, like Steve was. And Vinny got to that point. Steve was a seasoned veteran. He'd been at San Francisco, he'd been at Denver, and he knew what to do in there. And Vinny was just learning, although he had all the size and the talent coming out of the University of Miami. So it took him a little time to get there, but once he got there, I mean, that guy played for what, 18, 19 years? He had
Yeah,
a full
he
career.
went. Yeah, 100%. Now, tell me what like, I know, I mean, it's cliche to say the game has changed. It's always been, but what do you think are some of the biggest changes from when you were playing, even from getting prepared? Because now there's just so much science to it. Like, I mean, you have coaches now that are coaching these guys on how to sleep properly, on how to have headspace. You guys went out there, by God, and just had to play. And I mean, you played through pain. And I know that leads into this part of this conversation. You played through some of the worst circumstances, and nobody cares. Like, hey, if we can get this guy a shot of cortisone or whatever and get him back on the field, it was just so much different. What are some of the, and that's from an outside perspective. What are some of the changes that you've seen from back in your day to what we see on Sunday these days?
Well, and I talk about this all the time. I played back in an era, I call it that Bear Bryant mentality. where if
Hmm.
coaches thought if you don't practice hard, you're not going to play hard. So I
Yeah.
always link a lot of my injuries and a lot of the injuries that my teammate got to practice, because we were out there beating the heck out of each other all week long. And hopefully there was a little left in the tank to play on Sunday. So one of the biggest changes that the Players Association made with the last collective bargaining agreement was that they don't ever put on pads anymore during the week. And that kind of reflects you watch games and you see guys that are tackling poor or they're blocking poorly, because they didn't do the kind of work that we did every week. There's only so much you can get done in shorts and t-shirts. But on
Yeah.
the other hand, guys are having longer careers. There's fewer injuries as a result of practice, and that's one of the biggest thing, and I think overall that's how the game's changed a lot. They're not as physical as we were back then, because guys could get away with practically murder back then. Taking people's
Oh yeah.
head off, and it was definitely a different game.
So who was the toughest guy you ever had to go up against? Because I mean, being the center, I mean, you're kind of like in baseball. There's the catcher. I mean, you're the guy that's there every freaking offensive play, and you have to know what you're calling. And I know they. I guess yeah, you kind of came up through the audible era where, but back in the day, it wasn't as I guess like it is now. But who was the toughest guy for you to have to block and go up against during your career, or a few of them that you just remember like? Good lord, it just really rattled, trying to stay on your game with him. Who are some of those names?
Yeah, well, every Sunday it was a full time job every Sunday. You didn't have any Sundays off. You know,
You're right.
whether it was Klecko or Randy White or
Yes.
I'm trying to think of some of the guys. Even Michael Carter from SMU, who was my age, went out to San
Yeah.
Francisco. He was an all day job with that guy. The fridge, lots of good defensive linemen. Ray Childress, people that you hadn't heard their name in a while, but I'll always remember them because they were such great defensive linemen. Dan Hampton, McMichael. So, that whole Chicago defense was tough, even with the linebacker Singletary and those guys back there. So, you didn't have any Sundays off, and whether you were covered or uncovered by a nose guard or the two guards were covered, you still had to play against those linebackers. And those linebackers like Singletary were good, Romanowski. Some of those guys were really good players, and the game was pretty physical back then.
So how I guess Singletary was a little older. He was at Baylor a little before you, right?
2 years ahead of me.
That's what I thought. Okay, because I knew you talk about one of the best NFL products to come out of Baylor University. Singletary is definitely you and him. Y'all definitely both fit that bill.
But
So all right. So tell me.
that guy, practicing against that guy for 2 years, with Coach Corky Nelson. I don't know if you remember him, but he was from John Tyler.
Sure.
And he was a linebacker coach at Baylor, and they used to send me down there just to headbutt against Singletary, and I think that had a lot to do with making me who I was, and creating the player that I was to become. Was going against him every day.
Oh, for sure. And then that brings up a good question because I know so Michael Gervais, he's this sports psychologist I listen to every once in a while, and he's always talking about, kind of a player's self-talk and mental toughness is how important that is. Someone like you that has played at the highest level, and again, like you say, every Sunday, I don't care if it's 3rd string in the NFL, that's still a player that's gonna outplay pretty much any other person on the planet that there is. I mean, it's kinda like an Alabama game, when Alabama puts in their 2nd string, that's gonna be most NCAA 1st strings, it's NFL, it's all, it's 1st string anywhere maybe on that field. Um, so how important was it just to have the mental toughness to get through how hard it was back then and overcoming the injuries, overcoming the exhaustion, the practices where like, yeah, you talk about Bear Bryant, the Junction Boys, man, we had it pretty bad. We did the old school 2-a-days and everything, but then I watched that movie, The Junction Boys, and thought, we had nothing on what those guys went through at A&M back under Coach Bryant. How important was it to have your head just so solid in knowing what you're wanting to do and not relying on, because you said it, football came easy to you, but I gotta believe, Randy, that it wasn't just your physical attributes and abilities that got you that a long career in the NFL. It had to been up, but what's between your ears as well. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and that's important. But you know what? When it's all you've ever done, it's all you ever know. And that's it.
Yeah.
You just get up and repeat every day. When I had Coach Perkins came in. He was my fourth, let's see, no, my third head coach. And he came in with 3-a-days, and I spent 4 years going through 3-a-days in training camp in the Tampa Heat. They didn't even have time for our clothes to dry out in between practices.
Hmm.
And you had to be mentally tough back then. You had to want to be there. But this was back before free agency, and you couldn't just take off and go play for another team like they do now. If
Yeah.
you left back then, you stayed out for the whole year, and so it was a different game by those standards. But also, yeah, you had to really love the game, and you had to really want to be there to get through some of those challenging times. And even with my best record was 6-10 out there. And even though that's the best record I ever had, I had a lot of 2-14 seasons and a lot of 4-12 seasons. And every year you just kept thinking that was going to be the year. That you finally drafted that one player that was going to make all the difference the next year, and it just never happened. But looking back, I can't think of anything that I would have changed.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like one of the things I regret about, like I said, I had a great time at SFA, but I could have played for some schools like back then OSU or Arkansas. I nearly went to that wasn't as good, or Louisiana Tech that they were just making the jump into D1. And one of the things that somebody told me after I'd already played is like, look, if you're like me, I wasn't as good as you. I was good enough to get my education paid for, but it wasn't going to be at Baylor or Notre Dame or something like that. It just wasn't going to happen. But somebody told me it's like, you know what though, when you're choosing, if you're not good enough to really pick your school, it's a lot more fun to go lose in front of 60 or 70,000 people than to win in front of 10,000 people. And so, that's why I always say whenever guys like you that, yeah, you played at Tampa Bay during some tough years, but brother, you you might have been getting beat a lot, but y'all had big crowds and in the NFL. And it's just I can't even fathom. And most people listen to this podcast, they can't even understand what that is like. Another Tylerite who's one of my closest friends here is Josh Tomlin, who spent 14 years in Major League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh, he'll tell you, he's like, I was never going to win the Cy Young. I couldn't throw a baseball over 86 miles per hour, but I figured out how to stay in the league for over a decade. And he made a career out of it. And I'm like, dude, and is to be able to do that and to be able to avoid a real job that, for that long and get to do what you did when you were a kid, I think that's pretty freaking awesome, brother.
Yeah, well, and like I said earlier, I had 5 different head coaches in that 10 years that I was out there. I had 6 different offensive line coaches, and probably, I had 3 different general managers, and probably 10 or 12 different quarterbacks got up underneath me. But the one thing that was consistent was Randy Grimes at center. I seemed to survive all those changes. And, that wasn't easy. That wasn't easy. To pick up and start playing for another coach who just came in, who you had no loyalties to, and they had none to you, and it was always hanging on by a thread.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but then somewhere along the way with all this 3-a-days and tough work and old school football playing, you must have sustained some injuries, and then that's whenever the story that I know you have turned, those of us, I don't like to speak in a lot of Christianese, but those of us who are believers and many that are out there listening to this, they know that the good Lord has a way of turning beauty for ashes, and I think that that's definitely a good descriptor of what your life has become. So take us through when, uh, was it an injury that all of a sudden you have to start taking some painkillers or something like that? Kinda what is the testimonial start? When does this start to begin to take place in your career, Andy?
Well, it was a multitude of injuries, and a lot of them happened back during practice. And I can remember Leroy Selman telling me, that you stay out on that field no matter what, because if you're not out there in your position, somebody else was going to be. And I'm sure Leroy didn't mean taking handfuls of opiates every day and practicing and playing through the different injuries that I had, but I was that guy willing to do that because, and I justified it so well. I wanted to be the best center that ever played the game. I wanted to play the game forever. I wanted to be all pro. I wanted that next big contract. I wanted to feed my family. Those are ways that I justified it. And, I never expected that it would become an addiction. It was just what I was calling a necessary evil, to accomplish all those things. And, I didn't want to get that reputation that a lot of guys got as always missing practice, always on the injury report, always back in the training room to see the doctor, always this or that because of an injury. I didn't want to get that reputation because that was a reputation you would never get away from and what was sure to be a short NFL career. So, my solution was taking handfuls of opiates and practicing and playing through the injuries and handfuls of sleeping pills at night to get to sleep through the injuries.
So I gotta imagine, like, I mean, I had shots of cortisone, and I probably taken some oxycontin through the years whenever I was playing, but I always was able to once the injury or whatever kind of was gone, I moved forward. When did you start to realize that this wasn't just for the pain anymore, but it was, or did you realize that? Were you always thinking, no, this is to alleviate pain that just is chronic at this point, or kind of what is the evolution of that addiction? Because I think a lot of people listen to this, they hear these things, they know the stories, but they don't really understand how addictive it is. They don't understand what you just said, the ease with which we will fool ourselves into justifying a lot of these behaviors. Kind of what was going on, and when was it that you realized, oh man, I got a problem, and then what did you do with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I knew it was getting to be a problem a year into what I was doing because, the injuries were just getting worse. The chronic pain was just getting worse. And this is during the off season. And, I didn't have practice anymore, or I wasn't playing or practicing during the off season. So what was the point of taking all that stuff? But, at that point I couldn't stop. Um, it was, I guess it was probably, and again, I justified it, necessary evil and all that. That I did that for years, and it wasn't until the last couple of years of my career I can remember waking up on my couch in Tampa. It was about midnight or 1 a.m., and I just played a game at the Silver Dome in Detroit, and we had flown back and. I came into the house and crashed on the couch, and I woke up and I was all beat up and fingernails all torn up and dehydrated and cut up, everything you are after an NFL football game, and I didn't remember any of it. And I had played that complete game in a blackout, and I was the starting center. I had to listen for audibles. I had to listen for snap counts. I was changing blocking schemes at the line of scrimmage according to whatever the quarterback said. I was doing all of this, but I was doing it all in a blackout because I was taking so much medication before and after games, and all during the week as well. So that's when I knew that it had gotten out of hand, when that started happening. And that was the last 2 years of my career. I pretty much played every game in a blackout.
That's crazy, and that's the thing, yeah, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, if you're the center, man, I mean, you're the captain, you're the one kinda steering, making sure that's amazing. So, did people around you, did they know, or were you hiding it? Or what was going on with, like, your your circle of your teammates, family? What was going on in that regard?
I'm sure some people knew, but they didn't know what to do about it. But I always say that in the 10 years, or really 8 and 3/4, however long it was that this was going on, not once did anybody ever say, Randy, why are you slurring your words? Or Randy, why are you nodding off in meetings? Or Randy, why are you late to practice every day? Or here's the big one, why are you the last to leave the building every night and pills are missing out of the drug safe? Nobody ever asked me those questions because I was always playing good. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We had a safe that was in the middle of our training room, and it was full of narcotics. You could just go get whatever you wanted out of there. It was never locked. And if it ever was accidentally locked, we had three white guys that started on defense, and their jersey numbers were the combination to that safe the whole decade that I was there. But it was the culture of the NFL back then. I can remember a manager standing by the door uh, of our locker room at the stadium, not our locker room at the practice facility, but at the stadium. And as we walked out the door after a game to go meet our families who were waiting right outside the door, they would hand you a little white envelope that had two Halcyon in it and two Percocet or whatever, whatever kind of pain pills they had, and they would hand you two beers. What other occupation in the world does that? As you're walking out the door with the keys in your hand, going out to meet your family, handing you that little white envelope and two beers, and that was even coming home on road trips. That same manager would walk down the aisle of the plane handing out those little envelopes and two beers. And all you had to do was ask your buddies, hey, if you're not going to use your white envelope, hand them to me. Next thing you know, you had 20 or 30 pills in your hand, enough to get you through to the next time, or till you can go get your own.
That is crazy. And Randy, you know what that reminds me of? Now, people are going to. I mean, I'm not comparing the NFL to the SS during World War II, but I'm reading a book right now called Blitzed, and it talks about how the Third Reich, how they were getting the SS stormtroopers and all the Nazi soldiers, they were getting them hooked on
Speak.
methamphetamines, and they would that was used. I'm like, and I'm reading that book thinking this is insane that leadership would do that to their soldiers, and then the NFL. I mean, brother, that ain't a lot different saying, "Hey, you're our soldiers, and we're going to keep you doped up till the next game to make sure you make it back." I mean, that's crazy. They're handing you envelopes and chasing it with a cold beer too.
Right.
It's like that's insane. Oh my gosh. Well, so all right, so now you got to this point where you got a problem and you're taking, I guess, all the wide envelopes that anybody doesn't want. When does it get to the point where now which ended your career? Was it age and just physically couldn't do it anymore? Do you think it was because you had just beat your body to heck so bad? What was it? Because you said that was the last 2 years where you're playing blacked out a lot. When did you realize I've got to call it quits? And then what happens after that the NFL chapter is closed and all that's left is a beat up, big old former all Southwest Conference All American center that is now addicted to painkillers. What does that look like?
Yeah, and I never expected to take that necessary evil into my private life, but like I said
Mhm.
earlier, the injuries just kept getting worse, and the chronic pain just kept getting worse. My tolerance to the medication kept getting higher, so I needed more and more pills all the time, and I didn't have those enablers around me anymore like I did out in Tampa. I didn't have that drug safe available to me. And so doctor shopping all over Houston, Texas was a full-time job. Uh, but it just came to the point to where, I can remember I'd gotten hurt halfway through my last year. I dislocated an ankle, and that was Sam Weich's first year. And I could still remember him tapping me on the shoulder after that last game in the locker room and saying that, Randy, your services won't be needed anymore out here in Tampa. And I can remember thinking, wow, that's how it ends. A coach that I've only had for a year who has no loyalties to me. I have none to him. And he doesn't even slow down long enough to look me in the eye and tell me my career's over. And I can remember just raking everything out of my locker into a black trash bag and walking out the back door. And Randy Grimes, the football player, didn't exist anymore. And the reason I tell that story is because I already had this rage and addiction going. Now you throw in the fact that I don't have a uniform anymore, that I don't have that identity, I don't have that playbook, I don't have that itinerary to go by, and I struggled. I struggled for a long time without that identity, trying to figure out who I was, because football's all I'd ever done. It was all that I knew, and you think you're prepared for it, you think you're ready for it to all be over. Um, but until it really happens, you don't know how you're going to react. And I didn't react well. I was not prepared for it. And, that's on me. That's on me that I wasn't. But, things really got out of hand after that.
Well, and the thing is too that I don't think I mean it didn't occur to me, Randy, till much later in life. I guess whenever I got older, when you're in your teens and early 20s and even 30s, and you're watching guys like you play, they always seem older and they're grown men playing NFL. And then all of a sudden something happens whenever, like, I'm 49, you get to an age where you're now old enough to be the father of the guys playing on Sunday, and that's a eye opener. And then they freaking retire in their 30s. Now, I don't know, you take away the bumps and the bruises, the painkiller addiction, just that in and of itself. I don't care how much money you have. You're 35 now. I know they're playing a little bit longer now, but I mean, what average tenure in the NFL is like what 2 years or something. It's crazy short. But
Four or something like that.
yeah, so you're talking about probably about a 24 or 25-year-old kid that might have had a decent signing bonus or something like that. But even if they had a good career, they're in their 30s and now they're retired. They got over half their life. Just that is a lot to get your brain around. Now you're in the situation you were in. What the heck did you do, man?
Man, I twiddled my thumbs forever. I thought the money that I had saved was going to last forever, and that didn't happen. I thought it was going to be easy to go out and find a job, and that wasn't the case at all. I wasn't prepared to do anything else because football was, and that's my fault. That's on me because I let football become who I was instead of just something that I was good at. And like I said, I struggled for a long time, and the new normal in my life was ambulance rides and hospital stays and disappointing friends and blowing relationships with my family, and they nobody could understand why I couldn't get a grip on this thing, and it had taken me over by then, and it was a lot bigger than I was, and I knew. I knew why everything in my life was getting so bad. I just couldn't stop doing it. And that is addiction.
All right, so I want to drill down on this a little bit, and here's why. Partially, it's for selfish reasons. So I've got a half brother that has spent the greater part of his life in and out of jail for drug addiction. Um, and he's over 40 years old now, and he was recently out, and he and I kind of tried to connect, and essentially he wanted money from me, and I tried to help him, um, and now the last phone call I got from him, he's back in jail, and he's probably going away probably for the rest of his life. The only reason why he wouldn't go away for the rest of his life is because of overcrowding, and they just decided, look, we got to make room for worse offenders than you. But he's to the point where I was able to talk to a judge that I was friends with that kind of helped him get into a better situation last time. But here's the thing that I struggle with, and the reason why is I want you to help this audience understand, because I guarantee you, Randy, there's gonna be somebody out there that might not be the person with the addiction, but they're a family member, they're a friend, they're a loved one of the person with the addiction, and they just don't understand. And and it's hard for me. I'm that way because, um, I want so badly to help my brother, and I've done everything I know to. I've shown him love, shown him no judgment, nothing that just, "I love you, I don't care who you are," but I can't understand why you're doing that to yourself, and I don't wanna make this, like, so too dark and painful for you, anything like that, but also I know that this is part of what you do is you use your experience to help others. Help us understand what you're going through, how powerful the addiction is, and why someone who would just do that to themselves. Is it lack of of I don't know, appreciating yourself? Is it not caring? Or is it just such a powerful force? It's like, I don't care what kind of damage happens. This is something that you've convinced yourself you've got to have the fix at that moment. Kind of what help us understand from the addiction standpoint what it's like.
And I always talk about how there was no indication that this was going to happen to me. It wasn't genetic, it wasn't environmental. I didn't have any history of any family members that had struggled with any substance abuse. All through high school, everything was great. All through college, everything was great. And, the first couple of years of my pro career, everything was great. Until I started mounting or having all these injuries and wanting to stay out there on the field. So, it's I can't really tell you why it started, other than I just couldn't stop doing it once I started. And for whatever reason, whether it was the addiction, your body craving it, your brain craving it, or the fact that you're scared of getting sick because of withdrawal, or in
Mm.
my case, also the fear of having a seizure as a result of withdrawal. So there's always that fear, and it's that's why it's so important for people to go through uh, organized treatment, organized rehab in a safe environment with a good, safe medical detox, because that's the most important part of all that. And making sure that you're not detoxing on your own, that you're in a safe environment. And it was rough, and you really can't put words into what it feels like. I tell people that, God had plenty of opportunities to open the gates of heaven and let me in, but what he chose to do was open the gates of hell and let me out. And that's kind of how I felt
Mm.
when I checked into treatment that night, September 22nd, 2009.
So tell me about that night. What was it after all these years? And like you said, and just from listening to the story, it's not something that just happens real quick all at one time. It's a compounding effect, but it finally came to a head. What was it that made that either that last ambulance ride, that last blackout? What made that one the one that said, I got to change this? What was it?
Yeah, and the perfect storm was coming together in the spring and summer of 2009. Um, my wife, she moved in with her parents because she couldn't stand to watch me kill myself anymore. My daughter wouldn't let me come around my first grandbaby because I wasn't fit to be around her
Mm.
new child. I had a really good friend that I played with out in Tampa named Tom McHale, and he was doing the exact same things I was doing. And that was self-medicating his injuries he got while he played in the NFL for the Bucks. He played right next to me for many years. And one morning he just didn't wake up. And
Mm.
also, we had lost our last. Well, we had we lost our last house that we had in Houston to a short sale, and we moved all of the furniture out of it because the new owners weren't going to take possession of it for another 60 days. And I can remember laying in the floor of that vacant house, um, thinking, I was a college All American. I was a second round draft pick of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I was the 1988 NFL Man of the Year for the Bucs. I married my sweetheart dream wife, and I had two great kids. And here I am laying in the floor of this empty house with no car in the driveway, no job, no money in the bank, ruining all my relationships that I had. And that's when I finally put my hand up and asked for help.
Wow. What did that look like? Who'd you ask?
Well, my wife was willing to make another call for me. And back then, the NFL didn't have anything for former players. And but whoever she talked to that day up in New York knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, and that's how I got on an airplane that night. And I flew from Houston to Fort Lauderdale. I went to treatment at a place in West Palm Beach.
So I've often said my wife is my hero. Tell me about your wife.
Yeah, she's definitely the hero of my story. And if you've read my book, or if you plan on reading my book, you'll see that she's the biggest factor in that thing.
I did a podcast here. It was one of my monologues, where because right now, I mean, we just going through this political campaign. I won't get into politics, but one of the things I think that you'd have to be blind to not see is that right now there's something happening in society where it's almost like they're pitting men against women. And I can tell you right now, brother, without any hesitation, I am such a better man with my wife than I would be otherwise. And I think it's stories like yours, and it's stories like day to day for me, just, my wife kicking me in the tail and saying, no, you will do this. You can do this. We're just better. And I just don't want to leave this conversation without bringing up what an amazing woman, and how she has just confirmed, like what my wife confirms every day, that, brother, we're just better. We're just better men when we've got a good woman.
Yeah.
There's just no doubt about it.
Well, she definitely made me better, and she was there for me, and even though I was there, I wasn't present, and she was
Yeah.
always there for me, and she's the one that raised our kids practically that whole time that all that was going on. She's the one that put them through college. She's the one that kept working. And when I couldn't hold a job, she was the one that kept working. So, yeah, she's the hero. And, it was such a pleasure to write the book with her and to get her point of view on everything and to get her take on everything and get it down in writing because, I was in a blackout through most of that. I don't remember that, but she remembers everything. And, it was great to get her perspective. And just by the grace of God that she never left me.
Well, and that brings us to the next point. So, how was your faith journey through all this? Now, I mean, I know now look, you probably grew up very much like I did. And I've always said this to people who did not grow up in the South, and we're right here in the buckle of the Bible Belt. Sulphur Springs isn't far from Tyler. We grew up thinking, yeah, sun's yellow, sky's blue, Jesus is Lord. It really was just, that's how we grew up. But that doesn't mean that the faith stays strong through those college years, NFL. But so kind of take me through where your walk was in your faith walk, and was that part of this healing once you got there? Was it finding that identity no longer as Randy Grimes, just the NFL, the football player, the All-American, but coming to the realization, Randy Grimes, a lot bigger child of God physically than Jason Wright, but nevertheless, just a brother in Christ. Was it that? I mean, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I think it's all of that. And, I was raised in church, Friendly Baptist right there in Tyler.
Yeah.
Then I moved over to First Baptist Church. We were there every Sunday, Wednesday night, even all the way through high school. I was always in church. God was such an important part of my walk. It was just that I somehow kind of got away from him, especially during those pro years when all this was going on. And even through that, I can remember crying out to God so many different times. Uh, it was, it, it's unexplainable, but I can remember sitting at a picnic table, and this was while I was going through rehab. Okay. And it was exactly 2 weeks into the process of detox. And I can remember sitting at this picnic table on the campus of that rehab. And for some reason, I used to get up every morning and write down in a spiral notebook what was going on around me, how I felt, who was doing what and all that. And I don't know why, because I wasn't a big writer, but for some reason it used to make me feel better. And I can remember this particular morning. It was on a Wednesday. It was at 8:45 in the morning. I was sitting at that table. It was 15 minutes before the first group was going to start. And I can remember sitting at that table and I was sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't get myself under control. I was boo-hooing. And, because for the first time in 20 plus years, I was having to deal with life on life's terms, clean and sober, and all the relationships that I'd messed up, all the finances that I messed up.
All right, Randy, we're back for take two to finish up this interview. In the last place, we had a 300-pound NFL center sitting on a picnic bench, bawling his eyes out because he had just found himself basically in that proverbial pit.
Well, and as I was describing, sitting at that picnic table, bawling my eyes out, because for the first time in 20 plus years, I was having to deal with life on life's terms, and the huge wake of destruction that I left back in Houston, Texas, with my family, my relationships, my finances, everything, and it was like somebody came up behind me and draped a warm quilt around my shoulders. And the reason I say quilt is because, I felt weight and warmth on my shoulders. And it was like at that very second that all that was happening, I had this overwhelming sense of confidence that I could do this, because up until then, I didn't think I could do it. I was that one guy who convinced himself that I needed opiates the rest of my life because of all my injuries. But what happened that day, that was my burning bush moment. That was my spiritual awakening at that picnic table. And it's kind of the birth of what I do now, which is, with athletes in recovery. And, the cool thing is, I got to walk around that picnic table several times over the last few years and see where that magical moment happened.
And from there, so when this happens, do you feel like it's a warm quilt? I mean, that to me says that this was almost a sense of relief, somebody coming to comfort you. And so then describe kind of the walk out of that, Randy. I mean, did you have any relapses after that? Was it something that you just started moving forward? What did life take on at that point from a day-to-day standpoint, from that picnic bench? You feel the warm embrace of God's love, which, by the way, is something that a lot of people long to feel often. And it's in those moments of despair, whenever you feel that it's a very powerful thing. What happens from there? Where do you go now that you've started to feel that you're taking control of your life? But again, like you say, under a completely different set of circumstances, no longer the All-American, no longer the NFL player. It's just you, Randy Grimes, in a tough situation, dealing with life head on as just Randy Grimes. How does that look?
Well, and I did have to reinvent myself. In treatment, I finally grieved the death of Randy Grimes, the football player. And that was a real deal. That was a real funeral that, I had to let that guy go and reinvent myself. But at that picnic table that day, I knew that I wanted to make everything that I'd put everybody through mean something. And I also knew that there was a lot of guys out there that I played with and against who were struggling just like me. And for whatever reason, pride, ego, guilt, shame, they wouldn't put up their hand and ask for help. And usually it was because they thought they were the only ones out there doing that. They didn't realize that there was hundreds of former guys out there doing that. And as I went out, I went to the NFL. We started a new program called the Player Care Foundation. We started going out, reaching out to these guys, me sharing my story, and guys were coming out of the woodwork for help. And it wasn't just NFL guys. All of a sudden, Major League Baseball got involved with it, and the NHL and the NBA. Pretty much every sport you can think of that has an organization that supports their former players, whether it's the Jockeys Guild or NASCAR or whatever. I work with those organizations.
So, knowing your background and you're obviously a natural born leader. and somebody that, like we talked about way early in the conversation, that understands the head game part of this. Do you think that some of those skills and just that natural ability, as well as those skills that you developed throughout the years, did that help you become not only somebody that was able to reinvent yourself, but it sounds to me you've kind of become the mentor. You've leveraged all the things that made you a good leader on the field, which you have to be a leader, like we've talked about a number of times throughout this conversation. To be the center, you have to be a good leader. You have to be able to think quickly, make decisions, and be kind of that cowbell of the team. How much did just who you were as the old Randy Grimes, were you able to pull in and leverage to be who you are now to help drag some of these other fellas out of the pit that they find themselves in?
Well, and that's true. As a captain at Baylor University and a captain of the team as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I always I tried to lead by example. It wasn't something that I went out and struggled for. It was just by example. And I also learned early in recovery that in order to keep what I have, I've got to give it away. And that message right there. That said everything. And I was able to share what I went through. Lydia, my wife, was able to share what she went through, and it's just been a blessing. And it's also been an opportunity to heal our family, our marriage, everything. So I'm really grateful for the fact that she was open to sharing her experience, strength, and hope through this.
And I gotta believe one of the coolest parts of this story that you're telling today, it's interesting, man. I'm in a Christian men's group on Wednesday mornings, and we were just talking, and one of the guys was sharing today how he had gone through just, I mean, the pit in some, I mean, lost everything, lost his money, lost his family, lost everything, and just had a lot of childhood trauma. But here he was now, and I didn't know that story. I didn't know that about him. All I've ever known is this incredibly successful author and business person that he is now. And so it was good for me because I think a lot of people on this that are listening to this, Randy, whatever their worst case scenario is, whether it's losing your wife to infidelity or losing all your money, losing a parent, losing a child, whatever your worst case scenario is, you think that you couldn't handle it if it were to come to pass. But examples like my buddy that I was with this morning, examples like you, they prove that we're built for survival. We are built for survival, and if you're willing to do it and do the work, that can happen. Am I right about that?
I think so, and I think God doesn't give us any more than we can handle. And I always think that I often wonder why this happened to me because there was no indication early on that it would ever happen that I would be an addict. But it's almost like I feel like God was preparing me all those years to do what I do now. Because, I used to think football was life and death. But really, what I do now is life and death, literally. And, I think God was preparing me all those years to reach out to guys, to be that first phone call, to be that first knock at the door, and be able to relate to not only athletes, but anybody that's struggling with addiction. Because this addiction doesn't discriminate. That's for sure. It affects everybody, and there's not a group that I speak to where I ask people to raise their hands if they've ever been affected by addiction. That every hand goes up. So it's a day at a time for me and every other addict or alcoholic that's out there, and I know you got to give it away to keep it.
One of the things that's so cool about this story, I was just having this conversation with another interview I did yesterday, right before you and I got on, and we were talking about identity-based habits and how important it is. And it's funny because you and I have talked so much about identity in this conversation, be it from your former days as a football player to now reinventing yourself, and now you have this new identity. One of the things I was telling him is I help coach individuals in business and in health and wellness. And I remember I was working with a buddy of mine, And he kept saying, and he was really trying to take control of his health. And he kept saying, like, I want to be healthy, like guys like you and this other guy he was referring to. And he kept referring to me and the other mutual friend of ours and as being healthy. And I finally stopped him and I said, stop that. You have chosen to be healthy. That's why we're having this conversation. You have a new identity that is one that is healthier than you've been in the past. You need to walk into that identity and start living out that identity, because the identity that we determine for ourselves is the one that, if we are willing, we will at least be conscious of it enough to try to walk it out and notice those times whenever it butts heads with who we are not. One of the things I decided about 6 years ago, stop drinking any alcohol. It wasn't, and to my listeners, I tell them all the time, anybody out there that drinks cold beer or whatever, I'm not saying you're going to hell. I'm not saying not do it. I'm just saying, for me, as someone who wanted to be as clear-headed, as healthy as I could possibly be, live the life that I wanted to live, I wanted to have that as an identity. That became an identity-based habit. It came in conflict with that, so it went away, and it became easy because it's just, I can't do that and be the identity that I have assumed as well. And so it's really cool, man, to hear you say that your identity was so wrapped up in football, you reinvented yourself, and now your identity is, I got to believe, coach, mentor, encourager, overcomer. But all of that former identity is what's giving you the credibility to do what you do now, which I think is pretty freaking awesome, because a lot of people, Randy, they don't leverage that pain of the past. Instead, they wallow in shame. They let it beat them down. And I don't care if you are a big old NFL center weighing over 300 pounds, that weight can crush you, and you didn't allow it to. So I'm proud of you, brother.
Well, thank you very much. And I've been able to help hundreds and hundreds of former NFL players, pretty much athletes from every sport. And, God has blessed me with that ability to open doors, maybe where others couldn't get a door open. So I'm grateful for that opportunity, and that's what keeps me sober every day, is working with other former addicts or people that are struggling, and getting them the help that they need. All they have to do is raise their hand. I always say that my message is that it's okay to not be okay, but you've got to raise your hand and ask for help. That applies to everybody. It's okay. Big boys do cry. And, that's the way that we were raised by our fathers, because that's how they were raised, but big boys do cry. And it's okay to not be okay, but you got to raise your hand and ask for help.
Well, I think that's right. Now, before I let you go, and before we finally wrap this up, I mean, I tell you what, I think the demons are working against us, brother. Apparently, there's going to be somebody that hears this that needs to, because we had everybody trying to not make this happen, considering all the technical difficulties we got to this point. But before I let you go, I do want to ask this. I want you to give and take as much time as you want. It can be as brief or as long as. Imagine there's somebody out there right now that they're in that pit of despair. Their family is in shambles. They feel completely hopeless to overcome the addiction. They think there is no hope for them. They think they're damaged goods. They're worthless. All those things that we know we can take on, and that head trash that will come in and just become an 800-pound monster in our head. What would you say to that person that might actually be listening to this podcast right now, Randy?
That addiction happens to good people. I work with all kinds of people, whether they're athletes, judges, teachers, pastors. Addiction doesn't discriminate, and it happens to good people. But you've got to raise your hand and ask for help. So I want people to realize that it's okay to not be okay, but you've got to put your hand up and ask for help. And I keep saying that because, like I said, everybody's affected by addiction. I always describe addiction with a family as kind of like a jellyfish. It's got all these tentacles that go out and affects everybody and stings everybody. And that's kind of what addiction is like. And there's only, this is not going to end well if you don't raise your hand and ask for help.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your message and being so transparent about it, Randy. It's been a story of encouragement. Again, your wife is an amazing hero of mine. I don't even know her. I've never met her, but just listen to that. And now tell people, I want to know about the book. I want to know where people can follow you and if people need help. And I'm going to put all of this in the show notes. So folks, if you don't get this, it's okay. I'll be in the show notes. Just pull it up. But where can people stay in touch with you and get the help that they might need should they need it?
Well, if you can't find me, you're not trying very hard because I'm on all the social medias. We wrote the book. My wife and I wrote the book called Off Center. I was a center, and we named it Off Center. We wrote the book as a healing opportunity for my family. You know, I wanted everybody in my family to have a platform and to put down in words what they went through with my addiction. Little did we know that it would be so successful and that it would help so many people. So I'm grateful for that. But you can find me at proathletesinrecovery.org, or you can find the book at offcenterthebook.com. And, like I said, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter or X, and I'm on Instagram. You can find me anywhere, LinkedIn, everywhere.
Fantastic. I will post that in the show notes. And then also, our friend Gary Halbrooks would be mad if we didn't at least mention what's going on this weekend. So you're going to come back to God's country for a little bit, aren't you?
I am. I'm going to be back in T-Town. I'm so excited. It's been years since I've been back. And I'm speaking Friday morning at 6 a.m. at We Hope Ranch. At 10 a.m. at Triumph Village. And then on Sunday, I'm speaking at 9:45 at First Baptist Church, my old church. I'm excited to go back to my old church.
Fantastic. Well, I hope to see you when you're here, Randy. Thank you so much for sharing your story with this audience. And brother, Godspeed.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You bet, man. Well, that does it for this episode of The Jason Wright Show. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a Texas Titan Media production. Fourth Wall did the music. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Please consider going out to jasonwrightnow.com and signing up for the Vitruvian letter. Also, please go out to iTunes. It takes like 30 seconds to just leave us a 5-star rating. It does wonders for the podcast. I would be so grateful. And with that, until we meet again, go crush it and endeavor to improve always in all ways. I'm out.